This is caste. Why can't our children maybe better off as a carpenter? And a girl who thought of doing this play on Bishop's candlesticks for her parents obviously has a thinking, sensitive mind, and why shouldn't she get a chance to develop her capacities? I think the Indian middle class has this convergence not just with one but three normative systems which justify inequality. The first of these is the Indian caste system, which basically says that where you are born, right, determines whether you'll get a chance to study, what kind of education you'll get, and more importantly, what kind of work you'll do. That should be determined rightly by your birth. It is one of the most, I think one of the most pernicious ideas of human civilization. But as if that wasn't enough, we also have absorbed the British class system. The idea that, there's some big families, this, lower class, uneducated, uncultured, etc., old wealth with culture and values, etc. And then we have a third normative system. When Margaret Thatcher said greed is good. So basically, all of this, when I was growing up, our parents would say, it's vulgar to display your wealth. It was elegant to wear a small patch on your shirt and to wear old clothes, to not display your wealth. Yasmin Premji, Azim Premji's wife, was one day telling me when we were talking about this. She said when she used to go to school, her parents used to send her in a car, and she used to feel so embarrassed that her friends should not see her coming in a car, that she'd get the car stopped 2 blocks away, and she would walk to school pretending that she was also walking to school like the other children. Today, what would our children do? We would like to show off our most expensive car, and we would not feel embarrassed about it. So we are bringing up our children in this third normative framework as well, which says, what's wrong with having wealth? Why are we embarrassed about it? And, let's just enjoy. So, if you have a wedding where the cost of each plate is about 5 to 6 times the average Indian income, it's something. Or when India's richest man builds a 27-story house for 4 people in a city with 600 domestic help, I was reading somewhere, in a city where 2 lakh people sleep on the streets, on the pavement. Instead of considering that as something unbearably vulgar, we consider it so glamorous. And that's what we are teaching our young people. There was during the last winter parliament, at Jantar Mantar, there was this group of about 500 old people who had gathered, demanding a pension. 93% of our workforce is in the informal sector. The government has a very small pension targeted for a certain number of people. Whereas for about 4% of our people in the formal government sector, pensions are, the difference between the pensions that even people get in the informal sector and in government is 153 times the difference. We were saying that, okay, informal sector, let us just take the minimum wage and all of us to 50% of your last wage drawn. So let's take just the minimum wage and calculate 50% of that, and that comes to around 2,000 rupees. So we said, can we as a country at least say 2,000 rupees as a pension for every person in the informal sector? And this group of 500 people had gathered, trying to persuade people in parliament to listen to them. Of course, nobody had the time. I mean, what can be more unimportant? And there was one exercise that a few friends did with them. Suppose you got those 2,000 rupees, what would you do? And they started thinking. And somebody said, my son and daughter-in-law would perhaps respect me a little more because I could contribute a little bit in the house. Or somebody else said, I have this filaria and my leg has swollen up. Maybe I could get treated and my son would, accept me back in the house. Or somebody said, maybe I could, just buy medicines, etc. One lady, it was quite amusing, she said, I would sit in an auto rickshaw and go to the hospital and get my medicines. That was like, the dream that she was seeing. And my parents are, my mother's just passed away, my father is here. They've been very unwell over the last many years. And I've been in and out of hospitals. My father fortunately had a UN Social Security pension. And I used to find that every time we went to hospital, there were, we paid up a bill of 5 lakhs, 6 lakhs. And there was no shortage of people. There were crowds there. And those hospitals are beginning more and more to look like 5-star hotels. You even have this mustachioed bellboy. I never figured out why you should need one opening the door when you go to a hospital. But basically, the one sobering thought is that my father's sitting here because we are in the top 10-20% of this country's income. And if we were any less, not even if we were poor, if we just were on an average, he wouldn't be sitting here. Is that an acceptable situation where some people, where the majority of our people will not survive? We got this whole idea now of user fees. When I was growing up, at least you could walk into a public hospital and you would get free medicines and free treatment. We've given that up. The World Bank has started some idea of, everything has to be paid for. And very recently I was reading that the World Bank president said it was a great mistake and 150 million people around the globe are slipping into poverty because we've introduced user fees in hospitals, and health and education should be free. But we'll take a very long time when we think that is something that we can be entitled to. But coming back to those old people, when the day the dharna ended, one of the ladies from Bihar was looking very distraught. And my colleague went to her and said, Amma, don't worry, you'll be back in your village now. It's been a full month, or you'll be back home. And she said, you understand, that's my worry. यहाँ पर whatever happened, I was getting 3 meals a day. मैं घर जाऊंगी, तो I'm just terrified कि अब क्या होगा, मैं खाऊंगी कैसे? And this is an India this divided India. I look at young people. I teach courses. I do a course at IIM Ahmedabad and St. Stephen's, as you were saying. I also take care of these homeless young people. I was also trainer at the IAS Academy. Sometimes it's funny because in my mind and heart I love all of my students in different ways, but I also find no difference. And I'm sure an IAS officer or an IIM kid will be very unhappy if I say that I find my kids who were on the streets and who are growing up with me absolutely the same potential, absolutely the same possibilities, absolutely the same dreams. I mean, these are kids who in New Delhi railway station, these are kids firstly who had extremely abusive parents, father, alcoholic, it seemed only violence. But kids who had a certain spirit at the age of 6 or 8, they just say, "Ab bahut ho gaya, I'll take care of myself." And at an age when we can't even walk across the streets alone, they find their way out. They find their way into a city. They do, and they survive. They're also vulnerable. They're proud. Very few beg. Actually, only 10% of street kids beg, and the rest they learn to survive through picking rags, through other ways. And as they grow older, they also learn crime and so on. And we've got quite a sizable number of these children who are actually into serious crime, heavy drugs. The only entertainment that they have, actually, if you imagine if you're a homeless child, where are you going to go for entertainment? And, between these rag picking places, you have these enclosures where they show pornographic films for round the clock at 10 rupees, and then you have a place where you can just lie, have some drugs, and watch pornographic films. And these little kids have actually grown up that childhood. And yet, when you see them, the possibility of reclaiming innocence, childhood, a certain core gentleness, I just find extraordinary. But also that, some of these kids, now they've passed class 10, board exam, past class 12, we got 3 or 4 kids into BCom, BSW. One of them has got into TIS, and I'm having a conversation with very fine Vice Chancellor of Ambedkar University about, can we imagine a university which welcomes these children? And it's not just about admitting them, but it's also recognizing that they've had, they have strengths and they have things that, when they go to school, for instance, our children, we found many small things. Tiffin they open and they don't want the other kids to see. So क्यों? क्योंकि हम लोग पराठे भेजते हैं और वो मैक्रोनी लाते हैं. And उनका डब्बा एक तरह का होता है और we wrap it in paper. So then we learn that, okay, let's try to send macaronis. Let's let the kid not feel a sense of disadvantage. And you can do it to some extent. You can't do it in others. Sonia Singh of the NDTV told this story which I really love. She said she was the first class which these kids finally were allowed in, the disadvantaged children. And on their first parent-teachers meeting, she went in and she said she saw one man who was obviously a child of a poor kid, father of a poor kid. And she went to him and said, "Ke sab theek thaak, kaise chal raha hai?" And all. He said, "Everything's okay, but one problem has arisen." "What is that?" He said, "There's a birthday party." "So why is there a problem?" "Because a small child can't go alone. You have to, somebody accompanies." There are 2 kinds of people who accompany. One is the parents, they're seated in one place. One is the ayah, and they're seated in another place. When my son goes with his mother, will they seat her with the parents? Or will they seat her with the ayah? And most likely, we know where she'll be seated. And then what will my son feel? And so I'm thinking I won't send him for the birthday party. But he's so excited. So I don't know what to do. And I think we need to make these 2 worlds meet. But I also feel, the dreams that our children can see, a young person today sees. Perhaps our greatest injustice is, I say to our boys who are growing up and girls, कि अपने सपनों पे कोई लगाम नहीं लगाएं. But I realize that that's not true. I mean, that kid wants to be a cardiologist or somebody else wants to be something. Where are we going to find in today's world the resources to support these kids through higher education to fulfill their dreams? And I hope I live long enough, and I hope to see them actually achieve a little bit of their potential. When I teach my course at IIM Ahmedabad, I always start with, the very first day, I say there's one thing I want you to recognize, that you're not in this room and I am not in this room because we are the best. IIM kids particularly think they're there because they're the best. And I say, because if 1 billion people in this country had exactly the same life chances that you've had and I have had, I'm certainly sure I wouldn't be standing here. You'd have to figure out whether you would be there or not. Yet we have this extraordinary sense of entitlement. So when they petitioned the Supreme Court saying that, what was the biggest ground that they gave? They said merit of our schools is going to be destroyed by allowing poor children in. Which means that all of us in this room are genetically, we have all merit, and the kids out there are the ones who have none. And the unproblematicness of this assumption worries me. I'll just go quickly forward. It's, I've talked a lot about indifference. It's actually it's worse than that. There is, Elie Wiesel said, the opposite of love is not hate, the opposite of love is indifference. And I think that at the very least, most of us are guilty of. But there's sometimes, during the food bill debate, that was a special moment where, one can have genuine agreements, disagreements. But the quality of rage that I found, and because I convened the group that drafted that bill, and I found very few people in the political spectrum, particularly in the Congress, who could actually stand up and defend it with any conviction. I found myself in TV studios every night with everybody furious, including most anchors. And in one of those debates, for instance, a leading industrialist who's otherwise quite reasonable, she turned around and she said, how long do you expect? The rich have earned their money by working hard. They've done nothing to harm the economy. Why should we be taxed to feed the poor? That really became the core idea. And I had to say, of course, that you will agree that the poor also work hard, probably much harder. They've done even less to harm the economy. And in a good society, people of wealth are happy to share some of it. They can be, then there were more sophisticated reasons. For instance, that we can't afford this. But, if you really look at what we are spending on other things, including just revenues foregone for the private sector, is 5,50,000 crores is simply tax holidays to big industry, which is about less than a quarter of what a full-fledged food bill would cost. We have one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios. So whether we really have the money, whether we want to spend it, with what we feel is important. But the other argument was that corruption, there's too much corruption, all of this will go down the drain. Very reasonable argument. My only point is corruption is of course a problem, but there are corruption also in, say, defense deals. So have we ever said, let's put a moratorium on buying more arms till we've sorted out the issue of corruption there? Or there was great corruption in the Commonwealth Games, so we won't build any urban infrastructure till we've sorted out corruption. No, we will only use the argument of corruption when there's a program for the poor, and so on. So I think that there's something more, the rage that we have about slums, for instance, about beggars, and a sense of shame. So during the Commonwealth Games, you all must have seen, like I used to drive to work, I'd see slums, and suddenly I saw this little tiger cub smiling at me wherever I went, but no slums. And we'd actually put up screens to hide the poor. And because I worked with the homeless, they were driven out. There was a campaign, and so on. Because we wanted to be a world-class city. So what is our definition of a world-class city? Is it a city with no people?